Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Marc Kealey of Kealey and Associates, a government relations firm here in Toronto, the Greater Toronto Area, Mississauga, etc., gave me a call up and said, Brian, you've been having a lot of shows on housing, on cities, on transit, etc. I've got a point of view that I want to get across on what I think makes cities work, how we got to organize better our cities, what we got to do in regards to the upcoming election, Mississauga, etc. So I thought I'd get him on and hear what he has to say. Marc, by the way, was you worked for John Turner. What was your role at John Turner, sir?
I started out as a special assistant, and I was his chief of staff when I left.
Chief of staff for John Turner, Prime Minister, former Prime Minister of Canada, and you've been involved in politics your whole life.
My whole life. I think we've talked about this before in shows that we've done. I got involved in politics when I was 13 years old, Brian, and I've had great mentors and great tutors in politics, and it's really helped me to understand the perspective of how you deal not only people to people, because the business of politics is about knowing that people govern people, and that's what I've learned in the 50 some odd years that I've been involved in politics.
Okay, so let's talk about cities. What do you think we need to do to make cities work, either GTA or Canada-wide?
Well, I'm going to say this. I want to, and I think people need to really understand this. The most intimate level of government for anybody, anywhere in a country is the municipal level. Municipal politics is something that's really viewed as the third tier, because everybody thinks, oh, if you're at the national level, you're in tier one. If you're at the provincial level, ooh, that's, you aspire to be in tier one, but you're still in a pretty good spot. But municipal government is really nothing. But it's really the most intimate level of government for anybody. Sewers, water, roads, fire, police, and and ostensibly even things like schools, and all of those are municipal issues on a grander scale. We've put in this country libraries, pools,
community centers, pools, yes, arenas,
everything,
parks,
everything,
waterfronts, conservation areas.
Yes, and it's all municipal governments that are looking at the councils who are elected to make really good decisions, and oftentimes, and I'm pretty frustrated about what's happening in this country as it relates to municipal decision making, because I don't think it's as robust as I've seen in other. And you at the outset said we're a government relations firm, but we do a lot of global work. We're in project management in other countries, Brian. And I'm seeing some really neat and innovative things in countries where people would think, wow, that's just an emerging economy. But it's not. I mean, there's some really good and effective decisions and governance that's happening in places around this world that really puts Canada in a position to say we've got a human scale issue as it relates to development at the municipal level. And it's a real frustration for me. And
Sorry, I apologize. I had a really interesting interview with Joe Barrage, who's the principal of urban strategies, and one of the top urban strategists, urban planning strategist people, I think, worldwide. And he said that, we had this real effort for a while that cities were the economic decision-making body and engine that people were focusing on back, 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. Richard Florida and all of the things that he was doing in regards to, cities and how critically and important were. And we had, Nenshi in Calgary, and we had Iverson in Edmonton, and we had Tory in Toronto, and we had Bloomberg in New York. Really preeminent people were being mayors. And he said, part of the problem we've got in Ontario or in Canada is it used to be maybe the farm team that developed people that would then go on to provincial or federal politics. But today it's like it's the European League. It's when they fail at something, provincially or federally, then they come back down and live out and work out the balance of their career in municipal politics. And we just don't get the best people. And he used, and I'm not sure if this is fair or not, but, former leader of the Liberal Party, former leader of the NDP, both losers in the last election, now being mayors of cities. Do you think we get high enough quality people running our cities?
Well, there's a reason why we're not getting good quality people in politics anywhere. when you look at number one, the intrusion in their private lives, it's just absolutely abominable. Secondly, there's a lack of respect, and they're not paid enough. I really think that you want the best and the brightest in politics. Robert Kennedy used to say that way back in the 60s after his brother became president of the United States. And look what things that were happening back in those days when you had really good quality politicians, even in this country. So I really think we're not paying a lot of attention to the type of people that we're electing. And the criticism that I give in this particular instance, Brian, is the fact that we have obviously people who are doing this are doing it either for themselves or they run to be a celebrity. And that's just not the right way to get involved in politics. And it's a real frustration for a lot of people. I think we're at a stage right now where we really need to look at what we have to do to change the focus of politics in this country.
Do you think people in politics should be career politicians, so that they know, the way things work and they develop contacts over time? Or is it helpful? Like, we had the funeral of Brian Mulroney, the Right Honorable Brian Mulroney, the former Prime Minister of Canada. He was CEO of a company before he got into politics. Is it helpful to have people go from business into politics? And I guess a connected question, I think a lot of people are lawyers or teachers. Would it be helpful to have people other than that skill base in politics?
Well, clearly you need people who have to understand finance in politics. You need to have people who understand the rule of law. You need to have people that understand good debate and consensus building. So there's a human nature aspect to being a politician as well. But everybody says it's a young person's game. It's not a young person's game. Right now, the decisions, the issues that are affecting people in this country, in this world, are global, they're complicated, and you can't have somebody with a limited experience or an inconsiderate opinion. So I really think we got to think as the electorate on what type of people we want to see in government and what type of people we want to see to run. And I think we should encourage people from all political stripes to that end to be focused on the kinds of issues and the intimate issues that make people's lives better. And I'm telling you right now, Brian, we're not getting that. I'll give you this as a very classic example. We do a lot of work in Mexico. In Mexico, the president of Mexico is elected for 1 6-year term. Any governor in any of the states in Mexico are elected for 1 6-year term. And so their thinking when they get elected is how am I best transformational? And when you hear those kinds of words and the kinds of things that happen as a consequence of that, you see really interesting sustainable development and growth as a consequence. And that is, people would scream and yell and say, oh, Mexico's an emerging economy. Mexico will come out of this next election in June, just before Mississauga has its by-election, to be probably one of the emerging governments on planet Earth. And that's an effective consequence of term limits and getting the right and appropriate people to run.
I think that's an interesting issue that should be addressed. I do a lot of work in Dallas. Dallas has term limits. You're allowed to run for 2 terms. And it's sort of like the old McKinsey or BCG attitude of up or out. And so, what you got to do there is you spend 2 years on ward council, and then you maybe run for mayor, then you run for state senate, then you run for governor, then you run for federal senate or congressperson. And it really does create a discipline that you do get the benefit of name recognition, but you don't have this incumbency that is almost impossible to beat, because that you're only there for 2 terms, and,
Right.
and you're going to move on, and you do bring new people in, new blood, change, new ideas, and other people sort of, attacking, addressing, confronting the status quo and seeing if they agree or not. I think it's really helpful.
I couldn't agree more. I think, you talk about incumbency. The power of incumbency at the municipal level is you can't beat it. So, and that's a big problem, because there are good people that would seek to be involved in municipal government, but won't get even the chance because they just don't have the name recognition, or they're not always front and center on, whether it's on social media or whatever. And those are very, very damning prospects for the future of getting good people that want to get involved in politics. Politics is not a career. It's a vocation. And I think people need to understand that. You get into politics because you can use all of your merit, all of your skills, all of your network to come to bear on making good and appropriate decisions so that people can say, I live in this city and I got good representation because they know what they're doing, rather than, having somebody who's, I remember years ago, my hometown is Niagara Falls, and there was a guy running for mayor. He said, who better to represent the needs of the unemployed than me? I'm unemployed. And people are saying, you can't be the mayor if you're unemployed. It's just not the right and appropriate venue for you. We need people who really understand the complexities of this. And that's a mission, I think, that I'm putting forward. I speak on this issue across this country and in other countries too, Brian. And I think that there are myriad examples where you could look at where good things are happening. Look at the city of Detroit. Detroit has transformed itself almost overnight by virtue of good municipal politics and decision making, and it's a walkable city. It's got wonderful amenities right now. All of the deteriorating issues of its city are now being addressed. There's money pouring in. Another good example is Kansas City, Brian. $75 billion had poured into that city in the last 5 or 6 years. That's an incredible amount of money.
So I'm not familiar with the story of Kansas, but let's talk about Detroit for a second, because there's a couple of things. I studied it in a fair amount of detail. You may know that I was chief financial officer for the Ottawa Senators, and we were thinking about moving an arena in Ottawa downtown, and obviously the arena that was developed in Detroit, as you mentioned, is like Edmonton, one of the basic case studies for what the benefit is. Detroit really separated out, and it was maybe because of racial issues, but what happened is the suburbs separated from the inner city, and the tax dollars all went to the suburbs, such that the inner city really fell into incredible disrepair. And as you said, it almost vacated, both from an office standpoint, but also from an entertainment cultural standpoint. They recognized the problem, and the suburbs and the city got back together, not necessarily from a governance standpoint, but from a tax sharing standpoint, a planning standpoint, and they built up ad hoc organizations that would meet and plan things together for the whole area, and rather than having this sort of separate kind of mentality. And what it led to, as you've identified, is a beautiful football stadium, a beautiful baseball stadium, and a beautiful arena, basketball and arena, right downtown, and a complete resurgence and redevelopment of downtown. It was also benefited by the fact that because of some of the challenges, it has very affordable housing, and you can get a house in Detroit that is probably $1.5 million home in Mississauga for a couple $100,000.
Yeah.
And the level of affordability really benefited and attracted a lot of businesses that wanted to come to Detroit, because there people could have a really great lifestyle living on the Detroit River with a gorgeous home and a great cultural experience downtown. I think Mississauga has gone some of the opposite directions of late. We're pricing ourselves out of the market from an affordability standpoint, and we've been too focused on just us rather than how we fit into sort of the greater Toronto area.
Oh, Brian, I couldn't agree more. Let me just look, man. I listened to you on April the 1st, and when you talked about your vision, and I got to tell you, I've heard from hundreds and hundreds of people across this country about that, about your vision, and most people whom I've spoken with here in this city say the same thing. Number one, we have a walkability problem in the city, and I think that's a problem. We have a transit problem in this city. We have a housing problem in this city that's driving a lot of people crazy. I think one of the issues that you raised was, we talk about putting, the issues of Mississauga before anything else. I think, and a lot of people are kind of incensed when you hear things like, well, we want to separate from Peel Region. I'm going to say this, and it might be provocative to a lot of your listeners, but Brian, that's a dumb move. It's a really dumb move for a whole bunch of issues and a whole bunch of reasons. And the reason, or the example you gave about Detroit screams at me. When you look at Peel Region and what we could accomplish in this region on the economies of scale and by interconnectivity and actually, cultural exchanges in this whole region, and education, the kinds of things that make a region really strong. We would be silly to say we could do this alone. And that those kinds of things, I think, are going to come front and center as it relates to what's going to happen for the by-election this year. Let me tell you another thing that I'm very well aware of. There were lots and lots of press conferences from federal government members and provincial government members of the legislature and the House of Commons, respectively. All of them saying, "Oh, we're putting more money into Mississauga. We're putting more money into Mississauga." And I think the number was about $62.5 billion or $62.5 million. And then, they had big television interviews, and everybody was patting themselves on the back. We need 1.5 billion for some of the decaying infrastructure in this city. It's just been, we have really been behind the 8 ball here. And I gotta say to your listeners and to people in this city, we have to wake up and pay attention. We need to look at decisions where they're important for the longer term. And when we see that council is saying, "Well, I've got this 10-year or 20-year plan," that's not good enough. We need to be transformational, like a governor in the state of Quintana Roo in Mexico. 1 6-year term, be transformational. Look what they did again.
And you probably saw the the front page story in the Globe and Mail on the weekend that talked about how our public service federally has expanded fairly dramatically, and with it debt and deficit. We've had a fair expansion of our civil service in Mississauga. We haven't had a critical program review that's gone through our spending to see whether we're getting value for our dollars, and our taxes have gone up at a fairly hefty rate. And this analysis that, yes, Patrick Brown, mayor of Brampton, did, but maybe we should have done it before we talked about the separation, said it would cost taxpayers $1.5 billion of separation, which I think we all sort of intuitively knew. Politically, we'd like the separation, but when Brexit destroys the UK, when we all knew that Quebec's separation would, really have economic problems for Canada, if you're going to separate and you go the opposite from what, every other economic, rationale would say, it's going to cost money. Well, maybe we should have analyzed that before we went with what I think has a sort of a populist kind of popular attitude of, I want my own city, I want to be separate. It has a popular feel to it. But economically, I don't think it made any sense. And I think the reverse might make a ton of sense. Anyway, we got to take a break for some messages. We're going to be back in 2 minutes with Marc Kealey of Kealey & Associates, government relations, and what else? You said your government relations doesn't describe you enough.
We do a lot of
project stuff, project management, etc. Long-term political activist, organization, former chief of staff for Prime Minister John Turner, and a really smart, nice guy. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour in Saga 960. My guest tonight is Marc Kealey of Kealey & Associates. He's a long-term political activist. He was the chief of staff for Prime Minister John Turner. He runs Kealey & Associates, a government relations firm, and he's been on my show a couple of times where I've had him on panels talking to a couple of different people representing sort of, I guess, the progressive liberal point of view for us. And I've always been impressed with his knowledge of what's going on and his ideas. And he called me up and said, we got to talk about cities because it's a really critical issue for us, particularly now. Marc, people have taken a look at Canada of late. Bloomberg did a big article last Monday, you may have seen, that was incredibly critical and said that home affordability and healthcare and the social safety net were gone. As benefits or positives in Canada, and that they really said that young people can't afford, can't think of, can't dream of a prosperous future the way that we could or our grandparents could, and that we are a generation that are passing on a worse future to our kids than almost any other generation before us. Bill Maher did a comedy sketch that you might have heard about that was even more damaging and critical of Canada, and said that we had made some fairly massive mistakes. The federal government on Friday came out with a housing report that was really critical of housing and effectively said that provincial governments and municipal governments have red tape regulation and time to get approvals that was really robbing our kids of a great future. Given all that, our prosperity is down. We used to be equal on a per capita basis to the United States. We're now at 40% of the United States. Our productivity is down. Our median income is down. Our deficit is up. Our debt is up. What are we going to do? What do you think we need to do?
Brian, you raised an interesting comment in the last segment where you talked about the increase and the massive percentage increase in public sector jobs. When Tim Hudak ran for the Progressive or for the Conservative Party in Ontario against Kathleen Wynne when she got her majority government in 2014, he said, I got to cut back on the public service. And everybody was critical of that. They thought that's a ridiculous thing because you're saying you're going to get rid of 100,000 jobs. That's 100,000 times their families. This is a lot of people that really require a paycheck that you're saying you're going to get rid of because you want to whittle down the public sector. The public sector, again, is there it shouldn't be the best place to get a pension, the best place to get your benefit programs, and eclipse, really, for all intents and purposes, the productivity that you just mentioned, or private sector innovation that's really being, for all intents and purposes, just sort of put second tier here in this country. I'm really frustrated that right now, because a lot of people are saying, I'm helpless. I'm helpless to do anything. And I get angry at people when I lecture on this to say, you're not helpless. You have a voice, you have a vote, you can really do something. You just have to get yourself in a position to be considered when you're making your opinion known. And oftentimes we're ensorcelled, Brian. We're ensorcelled by developers. We're ensorcelled by people who can lobby better to government to get what they want. And people think, wow, that guy is fantastic and he knows what he's doing. So therefore, I'm gonna glob onto that to that stream. And you'll see things like we need more regulation, we need more red tape, we need more government services to manage all of that. When you're absolutely correct that productivity, which should be the focal point of this country, is on a massive decline downward. And I'll tell you, I'm very frustrated, and we can hear all of the, I'll call it Toro scatological talk about things like we're changing Canada to an innovation economy. But what do you do when we get rid of all of those people who need to do things like skilled labor? Right now, we've got a dearth in plumbers, and welders, and home framers. People who could. This is the kind of stuff that was going on in the 1500s in England when they couldn't find people to make roads, for goodness sakes. This is a problem we're having right now.
I think it is, and I think from a city standpoint, one of the issues is our downtowns are not hollowing out, but office occupancy is down dramatically. It really is, and there's been numerous different reports that have been made. Richard Florida had an article on the weekend that said what we got to think about is making it fun to go downtown, whether it's downtown Mississauga or downtown Toronto. You've got to think about, not just making the office a better place to be, but you got to make downtown a attractive place to be. And it may not be that people want to go there Mondays and Fridays anymore, but maybe they'll go Friday nights and Saturdays and spend some time. Otherwise, we're going to end up having shops, restaurants, cleaners, etc., that can't make it economic. And so I do think that there's something that we need to do in regards to arts and culture downtown and entertainment and main streets and things like that. I think that one of the big opportunities we've got in the Greater Toronto Area and in Mississauga is that the second largest concentration of employment in all of Canada is the airport corporate zone. A lot of people don't realize that. They think, oh, it's got to be, Vancouver or Montreal. The second largest employment zone in all of Canada is the airport corporate zone. But I fear that because it's in Etobicoke, Mississauga, and Brampton, because it's spread all around the airport, no one sort of grabs onto it and makes it the center that it needs to be. There's no transit that goes to. The Neptus Foundation did a big report back when John Tory was first running for mayor, and said that major cities worldwide that have two major economic zones have got transit connection because business people want to get together. They got to meet their accountant. They got to go see their lawyer. They got to go to the Board of Trade luncheon speech. They got to have social capital. They got to have interaction. And if you don't have it, then there's no benefit of having them in the same city. They're two separate, ecosystems that don't interact. They use the example, the Champs-Élysées to La Défense, the city of London to Canary Wharf, New Jersey and Brooklyn to Manhattan. I could go on. And yet there's nothing going from downtown Toronto to the airport corporate zone. No. And, you've probably done it. If you've got to go from the airport corporate zone to a Board of Trade lunch at noon, you got to leave at 11 o'clock, if not 10:30.
Yes. Yes.
It's an hour or 45 minutes plus parking time. And you could and should have some connection. And we've talked about, the UPX or the extension of the Eglinton Crosstown or something that comes from Kipling. We need to think about organizing the airport corporate zone, benefiting it with transit, and unifying it into the ecosystem that it could and should be that can drive innovation. It was interesting. There was a study done of innovation worldwide and compared Toronto innovation with worldwide innovation. And it found that the vast majority of patents come from areas within a certain distance from universities, except in Toronto. In Toronto, you've got a certain amount of innovation from U of T downtown, but a lot of innovation, it seems, spreads out from the airport.
Yes.
And what that says is that you've got a whole bunch of companies that locate near the airport for obviously reasons that, it's subs of foreign companies, or it's the pharmaceutical industry on Pearl Hill, or it's technology companies in the airport corporate zone, but they're there because of access to the airport, because they got to come and go.
Yes.
The airport is an economic engine.
Yes.
And that innovation is there, but we don't do the right things to grow it, incubate it, help it.
Well, growing and incubating those are good choices of words. Our office is up by the airport for the very same reason you talk about, so that we're proximate to getting to a plane as fast as we can. But just other things too. It could be a medical hub with the number of people that are around there. We're just not doing that. We have a medevac company that operates out of the other side of the airport, and nobody knows about it. But that's an amazing business, and we're giving we give Orange a lot of pats on the back for how they've managed to fix themselves up. But I really think that we had a guy by the name of Lou Turpin, who used to be the head of the GTAA years ago. He was the CEO, and Lou came to Toronto because of the work that he had done in San Francisco when he ran SFO, which was a fantastic airport. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a wonderful airport. And it was trying to say we need the same kind of model here, and we've got probably half of it done. But there's an awful lot that needs to be done to make that whole corridor at the airport. But Brian, the reason I'm making this point is when you're coming out of the airport and you're going into the exit lounge, there are three pictures: the picture of the mayor of the city of Toronto, a picture of the mayor of Mississauga, and a picture of the mayor of Brampton. And in my mind, it just says they never get along. And that's the problem we have with not only with municipal politics, but particularly in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. You've got this internecine fighting. You've got we're bashing the tar out of each other. And those are the kinds of reasons that stop the kind of innovation that we're talking about here. And we need to get rid of that kind of animus. And
I think we need more collaboration and cooperation, less division and separation.
Exactly. I find it fascinating that Mississauga is the third largest city in this province, and it's almost invisible. Sorry, you can talk all you want. Oh, here's what we've done. I think if you go to, people will say, yeah, Mississauga, cool. But it's really not. There's nothing that anybody could say that makes the city that I've been in for almost 35 years really, it's not Toronto, it's not Ottawa. And you can see what's happened in those cities, and you can follow it, and you can get really excited about it. Mississauga just doesn't have that kind of energy.
It's interesting. I went to as you may know, I was chair of the Mississauga City Summit for a while, and I went to a really interesting seminar in Manhattan, and it was sponsored by a group called it was Cities a Cities organization, and what they said is what you got to do if you want to have success is you got to have something that is effectively your tagline. And so when you think of a city, what do you think about? And if you think about something that comes to mind, then you know that, like a product, you've created a brand image that's going to end up being successful in the future. And so they went around and they said, when you think about Manhattan, what do you think about? You think about Central Park, you think about Times Square, you think about Wall Street, maybe Rockefeller Center and the banking there, right? You think about Vancouver. What do you think about? You think about Stanley Park.
Stanley Park, for sure.
You think about the ocean, maybe.
Yes.
When you think about London, you think about what? Royalty and the City of London and Canary Wharf. When you think about Toronto, what do you think about?
Well, yeah, I think to a Canadian, when you think about Toronto, you think about the Leafs, number one. That's everything centers around.
I think you think about the waterfront. And I think you think
Mhm.
about Bay and King. You think about the financial sector downtown.
Yeah,
Maybe U of T and University Avenue and the
yeah,
all the innovation there. When you think of Mississauga, what comes to mind as the defining essence of what Mississauga is all about?
Well, I mean, Port Credit would be one place that I would think about. The Marilyn Monroe Tower is another one. But there's some really neat spots. This is
I agree there are some neat spots, but you know what's interesting is when we went around the room and there were a couple of people from Toronto and Mississauga and other places in Canada. The only thing that came up was Hazel McCallion, longest serving mayor.
Yeah, I know, Brian. We all say that, and I think it's great. And Hazel is an iconic person, and
Not what the city should be known for. The city should be known for something, and we do have some of those assets.
Yes.
That you've identified that we don't build up and we don't make critical and we don't make it part of our brand image because they're not important enough. They're not as big a presence in our minds and in the world's minds, or at least the GTA's minds, as they could and should be. Anyway, we got to take another break and come back with Marc Kealey in just 2 minutes. We're talking about cities. Maybe we're going to focus in a little bit more on Mississauga in the last section. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Marc Kealey and I are having a good discussion tonight about cities and what we need to be thinking about in regards to cities. And we're thinking probably about Mississauga, where we both live, as well as the Greater Toronto Area, to make them more prosperous, more efficient, better places to live, better places to work, better places to raise our families. Both of us have raised families in Mississauga. Marc, we've got this by-election coming up in Mississauga in 2 months, June 10th. What do you think about it?
Well, look, they're big shoes to fill. Both, the former mayor and the former mayor were pretty formidable people, and I think, as I think about this, it gives us an opportunity to pause for a second, Brian, to look at what do we need to do now. You could look at the track record of both the last two mayors and say, okay. But now I look at where are some of the deficiencies. And as I talked about earlier on, we have in this city, particularly in this city, a walkability issue. We don't have enough bike lanes. We don't have enough. We're not extolling the virtues of what's available here for parklands from that perspective. One would think, based on the asset that we have in Port Credit, that would be a walkable part of this city, and it's not. I think too, we're still very, and I'll use the word, and I use it a lot, we're ensorcelled by developers who get, who say this is the kind of development we need to do, and they get their wish. And I think in a lot of ways we're as a city letting that happen. And I think we need to have strength in our council. We need to have strength in the person that wants to run this city. And I think that person has to have, in my opinion, has to have the right and appropriate credentials to do that. So I'm a little underwhelmed right now with what I'm seeing, Brian. So and it's not about you vote for this person because they're the same political stripe as somebody else. That means a hill of beans to me. especially as we're going down the path. And I hear this all the time. I hear from people all over the city that we've got a housing problem. I hear that we've got a transit problem. I hear that we've got bad development decisions, that there are too many reports, and the outlook is always 10, 12, 24 years into the future. And that's not good enough for this city.
So the federal government came out on Friday with a major housing announcement. They're going to spend $2.4 billion in this infrastructure fund. And a lot of it is only given out if cities do and provinces do what the federal government demands in regards to getting rid of red tape regulation and making the time of approval quicker and allowing development around transit zones within 800 meters of transit zones. So it's almost as if the federal government is forcing, incentivizing, bribing, manipulating, whatever you want to call it, cities to do what they think is right. And I got to ask the question, if that's actually the right thing to do, and I think it probably is, why didn't the cities do it themselves? Why have we created this? Why have we allowed cities to create this situation where we have so much red tape regulation, time to get approvals, such that we've created a housing crisis, such that the federal government has to bribe them to actually become more efficient?
Yeah, again, there's a saying that they use in politics. It doesn't matter at what level it is, but I think your viewers should pay special attention to this. In the public sector circles, they call it maximum administrative delay. And if they don't like who's in the seat, they're going to use maximum administrative delay to make sure that things don't happen. And that's the issue that we have right now at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels with our bureaucratic leaders, or our Mandarin class, as we like to call them. And that is not serving people well. I also think it's really funny that the federal government would be involved in municipal housing decisions. And if they're saying, because you're not doing your job, it's exactly what we're talking about on this show right now. So they recognize clearly that we've got a problem at the municipal levels, and it's demonstrating itself with huge bells in this city because of that maximum administrative delay.
So let me ask you a question. If cities have created a planning and approval process, a zoning process,
yes,
that is controlled by the councillors, and the council, the mayor and the council, because they provide the rules and regulations that the planning departments, et cetera, operate within. And we've heard lots of stories. We've heard stories about how ward councillors act like they've got a fiefdom, and that they, can manipulate, they can negotiate with every developer, this thing or that thing, and no other councillor is going to oppose the home councillor because they don't want that other councillor to come bother, developments in their area. And so therefore the councillors end up having an incredible amount of influence on the development that's taking place in their ward. And they get influenced by, the local community, and the local community ends up being the loud people because the turnout is low. And so therefore, if you're worried about your job, you're going to listen to those loud people, and they've been called NIMBYs. And I think sometimes they're NIMBYs and sometimes they're justified in their views. But the problem is they end up having an outsized influence. And I don't think that's democracy when one small group has an outsized impact. But if these councillors and the council has created a situation that is so bad that we've got the longest approval processes in the Western world,
yes,
and Toronto, Mississauga, Victoria, and Vancouver are the worst in Canada,
yes,
and Canada's the worst in the Western world, and it takes longer to get developments approved than it does to actually build them, why are these the people that we think can correct it? 4 of the current council members are running for mayor. How can you have the exact same people? How can you think that the exact same people that have created and lived and been part of the institution that created the problem are going to be the right people to solve it?
Well, the four who have announced, I know, and I'm in 100% agreement with you that I'm looking right now at what the last council has done, and all I've seen is forward-thinking reports on what needs to happen in this city. I live here. I don't like what's happening. I mean, a lot of people I talk to, and I'm not talking about dozens, Brian, I'm talking about thousands of people who are saying this city right now is not as great as it used to be. And there are lots of things that are.
Oh, no, you're going to say make Mississauga great again?
I listen. Mississauga has a problem, and we have no more developable land. So we got to get innovative on what we do. We talk about thousands and thousands of hectares, but oftentimes I think we got to be really smart about what we do with that. We got a waterfront in Port Credit that I think is it's almost sad at what's happening there, and what could happen is it should be the consequence of really good, innovative thinkers on council. You made a comment about wards. I think one of the things we should do is get a mayor in this city who says, I want to change the current structure. We should have no ward system in Mississauga. Everybody should be elected at large. So you're thinking for everybody at large. And that would, I think it'll go a long way to getting this nonsense to stop. We need to really have a deep conversation on this particular by-election on what the future of this city is going to look like. And I think our mantra should be, we're transformational. And the next mayor of this city should be transformational. And I'm not saying that whomever decides to run says, I'm only here for one term, because I think that's nonsense. You got to defend yourself. And I think you want to put yourself in a position where you're going to put your name on the ballot. You're going to use the gray matter that's in your head. You're going to use your experience. You're going to use your network, and you're going to use best practices that you've seen all over the world to come into this city and be transformation. That's what we need.
Mark, I read a really interesting article in the New York Times today, the Sunday New York Times, which I think is one of the best papers you can read ever. And they talked about GE, and GE, as you may know, brought in a new CEO, first time in a long time that came in from the outside, and separated GE into three different pieces. And it's worth 3 times more than it was before all the changes. Incredible change. And they compared it to Disney and a couple of other companies that have sort of stayed with the existing management all the time. And one of the arguments was that change is good. And sometimes you need people from the outside to challenge things. And I'm thinking about Nenshi in Calgary. He came completely from the outside and was a change maker, and wasn't on council before, and people were surprised, and he really did have a substantial change to things. Frankly, Tory, he was obviously leader of the Progressive Conservative Party provincially, but he wasn't a council person before.
No.
And he ran for mayor and won. And frankly, Olivia Chow, now she was council a long time ago, but then she left for a while and came back, and she's done more in Toronto than we've actually seen in a while. What do you think? Is change good, or have you got to have been there for a while so you know how the place works?
Well, I think there's a bit of both. You have to have some experience. I'll give you this as an example. One of my good friends is the mayor of the city of Sarnia, Mike Bradley. He is right now the longest serving mayor in Canada. Everybody talks about Gord Krantz now in Milton, but it's Mike Bradley. And Bradley, he was the guy that said, we can't function without having all of the suburbs and the townships under the purview of this major city called Sarnia. And he did that, and it cost him a lot politically, but he stuck it out. So he knows how the process works, and he works.
So did Sarnia and the suburbs amalgamate?
Yeah, years ago. So it's greater Sarnia.
So like Ottawa, Orleans, Gloucester, correct, and Canada.
Yeah, correct. Same kind of a deal. So, and it works. It works really well. And Sarnia is a great place right now. They've done an awful lot of really good sustainable development and good growth, transformational development that's happening there. That's really effective. So go to your point about what kind of a person do we need? Sure, you got to work. You got to understand governance. But again, the fundamental difference between being understanding governance from a public markets perspective or a private sector perspective, which is noses in and hands off, the exact opposite is true. When you're in government, when you're in elected government, you're hands on. You got to know what's going on. And oftentimes, you can use the best of breed from the private sector to come to bear in terms of governance and how you deal with people and consensus building and all those kinds of things, Brian. But you really have to know a lot of times your opinion must be considered. And I think you have to have a lot of, I'd say, not necessarily institutional, historical perspective from a from a municipal political perspective, but you got to know how things work and how to get things done. And that's using your network oftentimes and not letting the bureaucrats run over you.
We're chatting tonight with Marc Kealey of Kealey & Associates about city politics and specifically Mississauga and what's going on right now and what Marc thinks needs to be changed. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour in Saga 960. I'm having a lot of fun chatting with Marc Kealey tonight of Kealey & Associates, government relations and project management and lots of different stuff in Toronto and Mexico and all around the world about city politics and Mississauga particularly, because both of us live in Mississauga and we've got this mayoralty by-election coming up on June 10th. Marc, I'm intrigued. You mentioned Sarnia. I didn't realize Sarnia had gone through this amalgamation. As you know, Ottawa has. Yes. Hamilton and surrounding towns in Stony Creek and other places around Hamilton have merged as well. Ann Golden was on my show. She, in 1996, chaired a GTA task force, and it talked about the amalgamation of Toronto, but it also talked about the amalgamation of the regions around Toronto. Halton, Oakville, Burlington, Milton merging, Peel, Mississauga, Brampton merging, York, Vaughan, Richmond Hill, Markham, Aurora merging, and Durham, Ajax, Whitby, Oshawa merging. And they did talk about some of the more rural communities to the outsides. Maybe they shouldn't be part of what we're talking about. Maybe they should be part of regions that are to the north. And her argument was, if you had some sort of a system where you merged these things into 4 different cities, those 4 cities plus Toronto, which is now also amalgamated, should form a GTA council. And the GTA council should function almost like a separate jurisdiction, not a separate level of government like regional government, but more of a coordinated entity. And Metrolinx, for an example, the Pearson Airport, planning, things that really covered and crossed borders should end up being reporting to that coordinated entity. The city of Montreal, as you may know, I think it's something like 20 or 25 different municipalities. They meet on a regular basis.
Yes.
The city of Montreal and every other town, all of the island of Montreal, meet on a regular basis to do exactly that, to coordinate planning. Toronto has tried to do this. The Greater Toronto has tried to do this. There's 29 mayors and chairs that get together. It's chaired by the Premier or the Minister of Housing. And when the city of Toronto is 3-point-something million people and everyone else is small, it's really the Premier and the Mayor of Toronto that end up sort of carrying the day. And her argument was, if you had these 5 places, you'd end up having a system that might make sense. And, just one example, if you actually did that, Mississauga and Brampton would be 1.5 million people. It'd be the 3rd largest city in Canada.
Yes, of course. So, I used to be a hospital administrator, as you know, years ago, for 10 years in Durham region. And I was involved in an organization called the GTA 905 Healthcare Alliance. And the GTA 905 Healthcare Alliance went all the way from Hamilton in the west, all the way to Clarington in the east. It was a ring around Toronto. And it was always, they were lamenting the fact that Toronto and Greater Toronto at the time gets fundamentally better treatment in terms of funding than the GTA 905, which, so I'm very familiar with what Ann Golden had done, because we were looking at her in the work that she had been doing to help sort of stimulate thinking on that whole issue. When you talk about integration, the first thing I think about is, Peel region is great, but it's not big enough. Maybe we say it's Peel and Halton ought to think about merging. That would be really significant. And then maybe even the Niagara region needs to become a heck of a lot more integrated than what it is now. So there's all sorts of these kinds of things. It takes political leadership and the right kind of political leadership to do that. And that's
I sat down with Hazel McCallion, the former mayor of Mississauga, at one point in time, and we had this conversation. And you know what she said to me? She said, "Brian, it's the right thing to happen. I chaired that GTA mayors and chairs organization for a while, but no one's got the political balls to actually suggest it."
Well, look, I'm a mentee of John Turner, who said, if you're afraid to do that, get your head out of your rear end and get out of politics. because you don't want people who are afraid to do that kind of stuff.
Marc, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure, Brian. Listen, I'm going to say this. I think you ought to consider running for mayor of the city. We need somebody who's got the kind of chutzpah that you have, the global experience that you have, the gray hair, and damn it, Brian, the smarts.
Well, I appreciate that, Marc. That's very kind of you. You know what? Ever since I posted that April Fool's joke, I've been getting a lot of very positive response. So maybe I'll think about it. But I need you helping me all the way.
Well, listen, I'm a big fan of yours, Brian.
Marc Kealey, Kealey and Associates, thank you so much for joining us. You know, this has been a provocative and interesting conversation. And I think that one of the things that's going to happen, I hope is going to happen in this by-election, is we really do have a discussion, because I think one of the benefits of the by-election that happened in Toronto last year, you know, I like John Tory quite a bit, and I think he should have stayed, frankly, and could have stayed. And I think if he had run again, he probably would have won. That said, when there's one race, all focused on that one job, people paid attention. And it was interesting that the turnout went up for the by-election versus the prior general election. And I think it's because when you've got elections all over the place, you know, you get confused and you know, you're not focused on it. I think that we've got an opportunity in this next 2 months with this by-election coming up in June to really think about the Mississauga that we want to have in the future. And I think that's really, really good.
I agree with you. Brian Crombie equals transformation. I don't know. Maybe that's a mantra, Brian.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Marc Kealey, appreciate you joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos are available on my website, briancrombie.com. Good night, everybody. Thanks, Marc.
Thanks, Brian.